live.
Excellent. Welcome everyone to yet another community office hours. Today we'll be talking about Terraform 0.15, maybe some 1.0 as well. And very excited today to have such wonderful guests with me. Today we have Petros, Kristen, and Kareem. Petros, or we could go popcorn style. Do y'all want to introduce yourselves and say a little your elevator spiel and happy Thursdays to people? Petros, I can turn over to you.
Sure. Well, definitely happy for Thursday first. I almost fumbled that one. My name is Petros, and I am the product manager of Terraform Core. We are really excited to be on the glide slope to 1.0. So yeah, happy to be here with everybody. And I'll pass it off to Kristen.
I am Kristen. I'm one of the software developers on Terraform Core. I'm happy to be here too. Entertainingly, for the last several releases, I was doing entirely like behind the scenes, not user-facing work. So I'm probably going to make a fool out of myself trying to answer questions, but I'm excited to try.
I remember you tried that with 0.14 and it didn't work out, but let's give it another try. Hey folks, I'm so happy to be here to be talking about 0.15. My name is Kareem Satirli, developer advocate at HashiCorp, and Taylor, you're up.
And howdy everyone, my name is Taylor Dolezal. Today I will be your host. I'm also a developer advocate here at HashiCorp and mostly focused on infrastructure, application delivery, developer experience, all of the fun things. So if you find any dark corners or sharp edges with Terraform or other tools, please at me or Kareem. And we'd be more than happy to walk through those things with you and hear how we can make things better. Now, since this is a HashiCorp meeting, we do have some community guidelines, which I'm going to share up here on the screen. All of these simplify down to please be excellent to one another, be welcoming, inclusive, and friendly, considerate, respectful, professional. And we do have a link available to see our community guidelines in a bit more detail. That's hashicorp.com/community-guidelines. We'll share that in the chat here in just a bit. But with that, would really like to dive straight in and start talking about Terraform 0.15. So looking at the calendar, I cannot believe it's been a week and a day, literally, since Terraform 0.15 came out. So one question I kind of wanted to ask both of you, Kristen and Petros, is can you tell us a little bit more about Terraform 0.15 and where it fits with this path to 1.0? Some of your thoughts on that front.
Do you want me to take this one, Petros?
Rock, paper, scissors is totally fine too. If there's,
So since I did a recent HashiConf talk about our path to 1.0, this is why I tried to jump in on this question. The thing with 1.0 is that it is a stable release. And so it is really hard to have a stable release that you also introduce a bunch of new features in, because it turns out I write buggy code sometimes. So the reason that, we talk so much about 1.15, being the precursor to 1.0 is that this is the last new features that will be seen, are the ones that we release in 15.0 and probably the next couple of smaller patch releases. So I have been not really jokingly joking that 0.15 is basically 1.0 alpha. It feels that way, and we're just getting a little closer to 1.0 with every release. And Petros, if you have more words to say about this, you go right ahead.
No, I think that was great. And if for a little more color, maybe on what Kristen just shared, I would refer to her HashiConf talk about 1.0, because that's really all, 0.15 is sort of the decisioning that talk led to. And we're really, really excited. Yeah, I won't ramble on there.
That was, I'd say personally, that was one of my favorite talks. I know it was fun talking with Kareem about the path to 1.0 and seeing that talk. I remember, being at one of our previous HashiConfs, saw that and was like, oh, when's it happening? Is it tomorrow? The short answer was no, but we're on our pathway there, which is very exciting and fun. I took a look at the changelog and really some interesting features as the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in getting to 1.0. One of those items was structured logging, and really just kind of wanted to get your insight into what it is, why it's important, and why 0.15.
Maybe I'll kick this one off, and then Kristen, you can fill me in when I lead us astray. I think this is a really nice sort of follow on to the first question, because part of building a really stable Terraform is making that experience stable and predictable and usable for all sorts of the people that contribute to and use Terraform. And some of that means that, the really vibrant provider developer community, they require a little more power when they're building providers. And then the same is true often when you're trying to debug behavior. And so Terraform before 0.15 had a really, shall we say, challenging sort of logging style, in that there was either the console default, output that most users see when they work with it interactively. Then there was like kind of underpants gnomes question marks. And then there was the trace log level. And really, like, we only recommended if you had to debug Terraform that you use the trace log level because it was consistent. And I think that we started hearing from users, from practitioners, large organizations, provider developers, that we needed a little more granularity here. And so structured logging is really all about giving provider developers primarily, but everybody, the ability to filter some of the information out so they can understand something that might be going on, whether that is simply to understand it or to, understand some less than ideal behavior. I mean, remember that Terraform interacts with APIs that are out there that we have no control over, and sort of making those links and trying to understand when those links or connections, when that data isn't behaving the way we expect it to, and those API endpoints aren't behaving the way we expect them to. This is part of that work. And there's a nuance here that's worth sharing, is that in 0.15, you can target the core log level and the provider log level separately. There's one more nuance, though, that we have to share, is that, like, on the provider front, providers need to be built against the SDK 2.4 plus and kind of be structured logging enabled, really, that those levels and sort of which messages go into which levels need to be developed into the provider. And so this is not a feature that you're going to see all of a sudden work for everybody. Unfortunately, probably today, trace is still your option. But as our ecosystem matures, you will see that sort of that behavior sort of spread out and be usable. Anything to add to that, Kristen?
Yeah, actually, because I want to call out kind of the Terraform specific work that led to this. If you've tried to debug Terraform, you will know that we print log levels of, info and warn and error and debug and trace, but only trace logging actually worked. You could get no logs or all of the logs and nothing in between. So there was the first step that led to this. So the simple fact that the TF log environment variable works now, you actually can just see info logs or just see debug logs or see all of the Terraform, trace logs. It was actually really cool. Like, that in itself, seeing that get fixed, that logging hadn't worked as long as I'd been using Terraform, which was a few years before I started. So it's like, at least for 5 years, it's been like, we have all these log levels, but it's actually trace or nothing. So the precursor to the structured log and the ability to have separate log levels for Terraform and providers and all that awesome work, like, the first step was still just like, let's actually have logs at the level you asked for. And I was super happy to see that fix. So even though you may not get the level of provider granularity from like today's provider releases, the logs are still just better. And I really like it. And entertainingly, related to some of the invisible work I've done, and nobody probably will notice this at all, but you may notice, if you're used to looking at Terraform trace logs, that there are literally hundreds of fewer lines of logging, because I did some random invisible work and just deleted a lot of code. And that did actually simplify those logs a bit. Again, I don't think anyone except for like a Terraform developer would really notice, but it's incredibly pleasing to me.
That higher level of fidelity is always fantastic when troubleshooting.
And it's not just that, like well, even 10 months ago, our registry didn't have as many providers as we do now. We're right now at 968. I just looked it up. We had 965 this morning, and it's mind-blowing. So you're at least impacting 1,000 people with that change. So, it's not definitely not nothing. And that change makes it possible for them to serve 100,000 people. So thank you.
Funny note on that front too, Kareem and I will typically prepare slides. And when we do talk about the registry and providers and things of that nature, I think that I remember starting just about a year ago, and it was like, okay, 200, 250, 300, 400, 800. And then now it's just like, we could just probably put a lot in there, and that would be accurate. An easy way to keep that slide up to date. But very fun on that front. And thank you for all of that work, Kristen, in terms of keeping that up to date. I know that that's one thing that I've been asked recently are good resources for people to get started with writing their own custom providers, and kind of how they work through those workflows. So definitely hoping that helps keep things nice, tidy, and very visible on things that we need to fix as we maybe not so intentionally put bugs into our software. One other fun thing that I saw that got added into Terraform 0.15 were the non-sensitive function and the sensitive functions. And so both those kind of sounded straightforward, but really just wanted to kind of get your insight into what types of workflows those help enrich, or kind of new workflows that might enable. We had the sensitive variable able to be set on different Terraform variables, but was just kind of curious on those functions and ways that we could go about using them.
A little poetic about sensitivity in general here, so feel free to nudge me back onto the right track if I'm off somewhere.
Terraform haikus are perfectly fine here. Yeah. Plan, apply. Finish.
I love it. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's worth kind of backing up a little bit to 0.14 and thinking about sort of the pretty vast scope of work that was possible when attacking the idea of sensitive values in Terraform. And I got a question yesterday during the Terraform 0.15 webinar, which was kind of along the lines of, what do you mean by sensitive? So if it's okay, I'm going to start there, and then I'll get back to the question. And I think really what it comes down to in Terraform is that there's the idea that customers may want to protect certain values from certain things happening. That seems pretty ambiguous. So, some of the requests that we got, that some of the feature enhancement requests are about encrypting state or encrypting discrete values in state, and tackling the entirety of that problem space was not in the cards for the work we had. What we wanted to do is start and take sort of very small, sort of conscientious steps towards a set of behaviors, but to do so in a way where we could evolve them. And so the first target was preventing value egress on the console. So that means like something that's important to you. It could be a password, it could be a token. In 0.14, you could use an input variable value, mark it sensitive, and Terraform would redact that from the plan output. And the thinking there was that maybe your team egresses those outputs into a logging system, or maybe if you use some kind of automation system, you're even committing those back into VCS, so like GitHub or GitLab or something like that. And really you just want to make sure that secrets don't leak out in plain text, or sensitive values don't leak out in plain text. And that was kind of the space we carved off. And so with 0.14, we discovered that a lot of the ways, as is often the case with Terraform, that practitioners and organizations are using values, particularly complex typed values, meant that our first pass didn't quite meet the mark. And so a couple of things happened. There was some experimental behavior, which was that you could enable a behavior where providers could mark certain attributes as sensitive, and those would also be redacted throughout the console output. And again, we bumped into some rough edges around module outputs being marked sensitive or not, and causing errors. And so in 0.15, we did make the provider-based sensitive attributes behavior on by default, and we coupled it with these two functions, sensitive and non-sensitive. And so again, like taking a little step back, all of this work is about helping practitioners protect those values. It's not really about a sort of organizational governance policy type behavior where we're trying to protect Terraform from the person using it. From the open source perspective, the Terraform practitioner is trusted and is trusted. There's so much you can do with Terraform config that really, that's the model. The model is state should be protected, but we're not trying to protect Terraform from the person using it. And so these functions, the sensitive and non-sensitive functions, were originally designed to help users, or practitioners rather, sort of fix any behavior that may or may not have met their expectations or their workflows. So I'm going to give you probably what is a terrible example here, but let's say you use some part of a complex type variable in a resource, and you're trying to use it in a place where it would get exposed and Terraform errors, but you're confident that that's not sensitive. You might lean on the non-sensitive function. And conversely, let's say you're importing a token from a data source, and that token is something you want to be sensitive. You could actually wrap the data source in the sensitive function. And then if you refer to the sort of the resource attribute directly, it will also be redacted. Again, it's sort of giving practitioners a way to imbue or remove sensitivity. So again, the redaction abilities of Terraform throughout their plan and apply. And if they, let's say you download a module from the registry, and that module uses a provider, and an attribute in a resource generated by that module that you don't control is marked sensitive by that provider in some future, and all of a sudden you've got an error in your Terraform plan, these two functions are designed to help get you past that and to move along home. Gotcha.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I know that that's always been a fun and interesting topic. Is, you know, can this be read in Terraform's state, and just kind of all considerations there, encrypted state? I know that that's always a fun one to kind of talk through and you know, understand how things work. Even just data sources and looking things up from Vault. You know, that's a common question I'll get is, you know, even if I put these secrets in Vault, and I'm importing them in, does that still get stored in the Terraform state when it goes to look it up? So really excited to see more progress being made on different ways to go about marking things as sensitive, or, you know, hey, this is just my grocery list, or my Domino's pizza. We don't have to obscure it. It's fine.
Yeah, we actually got a feature request, Taylor, to be able to mark data sources as a whole sensitive recently. And although we're not there yet, and we're not considering that feature at the moment, it's certainly an interesting prospect. You can see where the need might arise. And in the interim, these two functions would help with that.
Excellent. Cool.
It's continuous improvement to make sure practitioner experience better. And I appreciate that a lot. It's not easy because I know there's, you know, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people using the tool. Everyone has their own use case, and there's not 100% overlap. We just spoke to a group of practitioners. Everyone uses it in a different way. It's mind-blowing. It's cool. But yes, you know, stuff like this makes it easier to have a cleaner experience and a more sane experience without bleeding secret information.
As long as we can keep our secret, we should all be happy. It's
a good Thursday.
Yeah, it's a Data Leak Monday, I think, is the best day for that. With 1.0 coming up, are there any big upgrades that people should be preparing for? Are there any good things to kind of get in order before we see 1.0 actually hit the finish line? I know that, you know, obviously, you know, I'm sure some things like maybe not be on Terraform 0.5 or things like that, but you know, looking for any other things that might be worth our while to kind of tidy up before we hit 1.0.
Well, so, you know, I mentioned that part of the point of 1.0 was not to have a whole bunch of new features. So in theory, and certainly our hope and design is that if you're going from 0.14 or 0.15 to 1.0, it's just going to work. We're not going to have a Terraform upgrade because there's nothing to upgrade for 1.0. It is 0.15 with some polish. So that's, I think, kind of the most important answer I have. We've done some work even with Terraform state file formats. So it's a little more flexible with, say, Terraform being able to read from older versions of Terraform state, or not quite surprising practitioners the way it has sometimes with going like, oh, you've written this state with 0.15.1 and I'm 0.15.0. So I'm just going to refuse to work. We have done some work on that. So as long as you've gotten through, I would really say a 0.13 upgrade, like we do still say, please upgrade through each version of Terraform, but really, as long as you made it through 0.13 and you're happy with provider source and you've got 14 and 15, and maybe you've explored some of our interesting features that started out as experiments and have moved into not being experimental anymore, the 1.0 process shouldn't be anything surprising. Petros, do you have anything you want to add to that? Put some more producty sparkles on it?
No, that was sparkling. Thank you.
Good. That makes me happy to hear. It always gets so confusing once you get to that point. And, I love that certain groups are very ambitious when it comes to major releases to kind of add some more features in there. What's one more feature? We all know, trouble in most cases. So very, very happy to hear on that front. Good to know. Good to know. When it comes to testing our Terraform code, the test provider was something that I've been hearing a lot about, and just been getting asked quite a few questions on that front. Could you tell us a little bit more about Terraform test and just some of the plans and considerations for using that in the future?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think the sort of like sensitivity, the kind of core premise or position that we're taking is that there are some really powerful test frameworks out there already. Kitchen Terraform by Aaron Lane and the group of people and contributors there. Terraform test, TerraTest written in Go. What we thought was perfect for a Terraform sort of proper audience, so an audience that are using the CLI tool this team produces, is a way to define tests using existing constructs in HCL, and kind of keep that in your Terraform code base. So writing tests with HCL using data sources and assertions of that type, in our mind, and it really is a premise, because let's be fair, this is an experimental feature. But it's an experimental feature that we believe is the direction that this team wants to take for a native test framework in the tool itself. I think one of the things you highlighted, Taylor, though, that there was this idea of a test provider, is something we can keep in mind. We don't have any concrete plans, to be clear, but if you had a chance to use the test provider included a little more sort of a few more options where it came to describing tests. So whereas the experimental version we have shipped here is, HCL specific, requires you to use HCL specific constructs, blocks. The Terraform test provider included the ability to use the test anything protocol. And so, I think that there is probably a world where we might move it somewhere in that direction. But again, a lot of where this goes is highly dependent on, and we have a new guest who has joined. Sorry. Yeah. A lot of, I also love cats. I'm easily distracted.
Sorry.
No, I love it. This is not like Kristen and Terraform is not complete without a cat. It's awesome. But what I was going to say was, I think that this work is really dependent on the kind of feedback we get, because one of the things personally I had seen in doing some research with large customers and small customers is that testing was such a broad space for all of our Terraform users. Different teams had different needs. And so our approach is that those don't go away. right? Like Kitchen Terraform's not going away, TerraTest isn't going away. But if you want to build a module specific test, so let's say to guarantee that the module you're building for your teams will be testable, will do when given the values it needs to deploy infra, it will do those things. This test framework is designed to validate that, to build some actual infra, run some assertions against it, and allow you to move along. It's not meant to be the end all and be all. It could be one day, but right now we're trying to, much like sensitivity, carve off an area of the experience that we think delivers the most value, that we think answers a real need. And that need again is, does this module, when given the things it says it needs, will it do the thing I expect it to do? And it's as simple as that. That's the goal that we're trying to get to. I don't know if you have anything to add, Kristen. Okay.
I do not.
I liked the steps that were taken with custom validation and putting that into variables too. I felt like that solved a lot of the equation for a lot of the workflows that I could identify, and kind of seeing that paired with, for like the AWS provider, being able to have a data source to actually see what types of compute I can actually start to work with, and being able to kind of pair those things together, add that custom validation, I feel like gets us a little bit further into being able to kind of safeguard and set our modules and other things up for success when we're actually going and working through our infrastructure, and helping hopefully unknowing practitioner that's just new to the team, or just kind of safeguarding against those things. So very, very appreciative of that. Awesome.
I think part of that is
shouting out. Oh, sorry, Kareem.
I was going to say, part of having a good testing strategy is also having defense in depth. It's no different than security. You want to have as many layers as possible and have all the cheap tests run early. Like to what Taylor says, variable validation. If you know your organization can only use certain types of virtual machines or database servers, have those in your module. You'll get the failure early on, which is awesome. And you don't even have to try to deploy because your code will catch it for you. To me, that's the first line of code testing I want to have.
Yeah, and what I wanted to add to that, I agree completely, is that it's worth calling out that is why we are so fond of this particular testing strategy, is that it builds on those things. So, data sources, variable validation, they become pieces of a larger puzzle that the practitioner or the team is empowered to put together in different ways. And just because you use variable validation in a production module doesn't mean it's not equally valuable within the sort of what you're going to use with Terraform testing. And the shout out I wanted to give is that a lot of this is stemming out of our tech lead. So the tech lead on Terraform, his name is Martin Atkins. And if anyone's had a chance to participate in Stack Overflow or the Terraform subreddit or the Discuss, Martin is very generous with his thinking and time with our users. And a lot of this comes out of sort of his very, very powerful vision for simplifying these complex needs and sort of working on them in, a way where we can assess where we are today, like with Terraform test, and evolve it into a production ready version of the feature, in the future.
Excellent. No, thank you so much for that. And I feel like it is fun to kind of see all of the ways in which Terraform works to kind of evolve and then fit all those use cases, or honestly just do the best that it possibly can in each of those specific areas. So just very, very happy to see. Now I know I've been grilling both of you on some technical questions and posturing and architecture and Terraform philosophy, if you will. And now we'd kind of like to move into some more fun questions, and I'll definitely pull you in, Kareem, as far as this goes. A reminder to those of you that are watching today, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in chat, because we'd love to get those answered. Thank you for watching, but this isn't all about us. This is about you and the community and answering any questions that you might have on that front. So feel free to throw those in chat, and we'll get to those. The question that I have for you all, and we can start off with Kareem, actually. What is your favorite part of the Terraform ecosystem outside of the core language? That could be providers, the registry, modules, etc. What are some of your favorite things within the Terraform ecosystem?
I think the fact that it's HCL, because a single language gives me access to a wide variety of tools, and not just tools that are supported by Terraform, but tools outside of Terraform. Packer, Vault, Consul, Nomad are all HCL based. And so you learn this one language, this one configuration language, and you're good. Your infrastructure will be grateful for that. I'm excited about that. But specific to Terraform, I'd say Consul is just such an underrated, but so amazing feature, because you can do a lot of testing, especially if you have like data structures that you're getting back from, you mentioned data sources, right? So easy to just go in there, do a lookup of the keys you have, and then build your module rather than doing like plan, apply. Okay, cool. I'm closer to the path I want. Just that, whole JSON path massaging, essentially, you can do in a Consul way better. Also, if you need to generate a timestamp or, do arithmetic, then, Terraform Consul, your place to go to.
I agree with that. I think things like, Consul Terraform Sync and all of the other options that are starting to kind of arise from having that layer available to you are quite nifty. And I can absolutely remember several times where instead of defining 50 plus environment variables, just kind of turning to Consul to store those things. Never anything secret, of course, I assure you. For that, I'd use Vault, but that's another story. Kristen, what's your favorite part or parts of the Terraform ecosystem outside the core language?
I've been lucky enough to dig into some projects with the Terraform SDK team, and I've showed up at some of their office hours, so I'm starting to get more involved. And so that's been a lot of fun, because obviously providers are what I would think of as the most important part of Terraform. Like Terraform is an engine, but it's the providers doing all the heavy lifting. Honestly, as complicated as Terraform is, on some level, it's just a graph. The providers do all the work. We just tell them what order to do it in. So being able to get in and get involved with that team and find out what kind of, pain points are there and remaining bugs and feature issues, and really just learning how that SDK works, how provider developers think and how they kind of approach Terraform and solving problems has been really fun to dig into. So it's exciting for me, both as like an employee who gets to write code on it and really likes developing it, and as someone who was a Terraform practitioner for years before I joined, really excited to see what providers can do. So that's been my happy space lately.
That's awesome. It's to me, it's just so fun to hear that, most people there's just no two people like in kind of all of those different spaces when it comes to the Terraform community and just all of those tools that kind of come out of things. I know that I think, what was it, that around this holiday season, rounding out 2020, there was a Christmas tree provider and some other things on that front too. So, some things for testing, some things for preparing your presents, maybe. Always fun to see. Petros, that leaves you. What are your thoughts on fun things within the ecosystem?
Well, and we should be clear here, if we could put aside Chitara and Kristen's cats, which are pretty essential to the Terraform ecosystem at this point. I think one of my favorite things about open source software in general, and Terraform is no exception, are the tools that crop up around it to help users with their specific workflows. Things that come to mind are like TF Switch or TF Scaffold, TF End. There really is a tool to help a practitioner work the way they want. And I love that about this in general. The passion, that developers bring to developer tooling is one of my favorite things. Because if there's a problem, no matter how niche it is, how small it is, we can create a tool to solve that need. And I love those things. I think on the other side of the spectrum, and this is going to sound like I'm shilling here, but I really am not. A lot of the new additions in Terraform Cloud, which are, not really necessarily part of the Terraform open source ecosystem, but the larger Terraform ecosystem, are really starting to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Surface the kind of data and valuable data that's contained in state files, particularly at scale, where I can see the types of types of outputs that are in any given, workspace visually, maybe even, a future with resources. There's a lot of value there to make quick connections between, Terraform, sort of running Terraform configuration, if I could use that turn of phrase. I really shouldn't, but Sylvie, like running Terraform configuration at scale, I think that's been pretty exciting as well for me to see, that tool kind of complement Terraform OSS so nicely.
I think with that, I'm starting to hear about some more use cases and different ways to think about Terraform too. I was talking to some colleagues a few days back, and they were working with someone that was utilizing Terraform Enterprise, some others that were using Terraform Cloud, and asking about ways in which they impact the CPU and memory, and like, how can I make these runs a little bit more efficient, or am I really following best practices in this way? Should I break things up? Should I write my modules differently? So, I do think that we're only at the tip of the iceberg in terms of all of these different types of things that we'll get to see kind of added into the community as time goes on, but very, very fun. So I've got a couple more questions here. I promise these aren't too hardcore grilling, but I do have some fun ones to round things out if people don't have any questions. Built-in vendor provisioners have been removed within the 0.15 release. What are your thoughts on workarounds for those workflows? Yeah, if you need a fan provider or something like that, please let us know. Maybe we can work on that. With regards to vendor provisioners, I've seen people kind of work around that with local exec, with the null provider, with remote exec. Do you have any thoughts on, if that's a good way to go, or if there might be some different ways to work through those architectures and workflows when it comes to writing Terraform?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this one brief to give space for others to chime in. I think, in thinking about workflows that require what I'm going to call, outside of Terraform provisioning, and I think that's what I want to focus on a little bit, is that the things that a provisioner does aren't modeled by Terraform in our state file, and that can become a problem. And so our thinking and our goal as, sort of Team Terraform and Team Terraform Core is to try to find a way to encourage more of that modeling to either happen in Terraform or to happen at another point in the pipeline. So, at the highest level, the thing we are asking practitioners and organizations to consider is, do some of the kind of alternatives to this, and I'll be specific, Cloud Init and Packer in particular, solve those needs, where you can leverage a workflow where you're building your machine image, you're preparing it, and then provisioning it, not the provisioner, this is very confusing for everybody, I know, but provisioning it with Terraform, instead of, provisioning with Terraform, then reaching in and changing something that we struggle to manage after the fact. And so if those workflows work, they can become a really helpful part of automating infrastructure at scale, because they're repeatable, Packer machine images code, Cloud Init, you can codify that as well. And so you gain a lot of advantages. At the same time, we realize that you need an escape hatch. And I think it's important also to add that the vendor provisioners were, and I'm mincing words here, but time is limited. The vendor provisioners were really sort of scripted versions of how you would use things like Ansible or Puppet or Chef within the generic provisioners to begin with. And so a lot of that is still there. A lot of that functionality is still available. It now just requires a little extra work to use. I think the last thing I'll share before ending this is that I've met some customers who I can't name who realize that this idea of being able to model what happens by tools like Ansible and Puppet and Chef is important. And they built in-house providers. Now, this isn't necessarily easy, but an in-house provider that would do that work and model it the way Terraform needs, so that when you want to come to destroy or change or update resources, everything works the way we expect it to. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to Kristen and then go from there.
To be fair, your ending note was exactly what I wanted to hint at. So, to start, we're not getting rid of, of course, remote exec or local exec anytime soon, if at all, not at all. So those are still around if you really need to call out to an external system and say, please, you go provision my server. But yeah, the possibility of remodeling, some of the vendor provisioners we have today as providers is actually what's most excited to me. It is not something I've tried. It would be up to, other provider developers to take on. But in a lot of ways, I think it makes a lot more sense because then Terraform still has the same ability to, evaluate things and make sure that all the steps are happening in the proper order and that the right things succeed and you get the outputs you need. So I think there's some really exciting possibilities there. I don't know how often the correct answer would be to use a provider versus if you have the ability to use something like Cloud.net, depending on what you're provisioning. Of course, that's a very limited use case, but I still think that tends to be the better answer. But I think there's a lot of real cool potentials in providers. And so that's something I would love to see more of in the future.
To me, one thing that really sticks out is by removing those things, we're pushing people into a certain direction. And when you look at the changelog for 0.15, we've removed verified plugins, we've removed get plugins as an option because Terraform now does those things for you, because we think plugin verification should happen 100% of the time, not just when you give that flag. We want to push you towards an experience that's consistent, that's reliable, and that's worthy of a 1.0. And doing stuff with those resources that looks super creative and, get you credit at the bar. Yes, I mean, totally possible, but not good and not repeatable. So I'm glad we're heading in that direction.
I like that in projects that Kareem and I have worked on. I think this has been a big focus of things that we've talked on is what do we use Terraform for? And it's always been to stand up infrastructure, right? That's the easy answer. Everyone knows that, of course. But then there are tools like local exec, remote exec, and these and these provisioners. And we kind of have asked ourselves, do we want Terraform to be in the business of configuration management? After we stand up something like a Nomad cluster or a Kubernetes cluster, there are types of auto-scaling plugins that we can add. There's all of these other considerations, or even application deployment, GitOps workflows and operators and things like that we can install into that infrastructure, into those orchestration frameworks. And I think that I would love to get your thoughts on kind of what you think of Terraform as is we definitely see a line with provisioning that infrastructure, and then configuration being, potentially a different tool in some cases, whether that be Cloud.net or whether that be something that actually is a binary that runs on these machines. But do you have any thoughts about kind of where that line is for Terraform and when, it might be too much that you're putting stock in Terraform to do or too little?
Yeah, I could talk about this a little. Before I was doing infrastructure as code, I was doing configuration management. I spent several years basically working with Puppet all day, all the time. And when configuration management was my daily jam, I spent a lot of time pushing back on having our configuration management do our application deployment because I felt like, yes, the one could do the other, but I'm not going to say that, the one was bad at application deployment, but it wasn't its specialty either. And I would much rather have the right tool for the job. And that's the same attitude I bring to Terraform. Terraform is here to provision infrastructure. There are some very definitive things we could do. And then there's a point at which Terraform has just stopped being the best tool for the job. And that, as someone who had to deal with a lot of bug reports in Terraform, seemed to be anytime you were using a provisioner that wasn't one of our main built-in ones. And this is not to knock the provisioners, the people who wrote them. These were all a great idea, great code. But you could do better. There were bespoke tools that did the job better. And I think that, where that line falls is going to be different for every person in every organization and every bit of infrastructure. But I think coming in with the attitude of, I'm going to use Terraform to the best of its abilities. And the minute it's not the best tool for the job, I'm going to, shell out, exec out, Cloud.net instead Packer instead, right? The same way, Terraform does a lot of awesome things, but if you have a ton of secrets, let's go to Vault and Console, right? Let's just find the right tool for the job. Where that line is can vary. For us, it was kind of easy to say we want to cut that line off at provisioners because frankly, they frequently didn't work the way people expected them to do. We'd fix a bug for one person, but that would introduce a bug for someone else who was depending on the buggy behavior. It got a little too hard. And, we have high standards. And so when we found ourselves like every day going like, these are just not good enough, they're not awful, they're not bad, they were lovely ideas, they're just not good enough. And that's where the line is, really. It's not as much of the like specific job you were doing, but the moment you look at it and go, this isn't good enough, that's not good enough for us, right? Terraform needs to be the best at what it does and not try to do anything else. So that's how I think about that.
Yeah, I would build on that, actually. I wholeheartedly agree. And to tie that in with our last answer, and something you said, Taylor, that this marvel's been rolling around in my head about configuration management, is that when those patterns happen in Terraform, so it's almost like they're unmanaged at that point from Terraform's point of view. And that's the hard part. That's what we were trying to get at in the previous answer with consider providers for these behaviors, because at that point, it becomes a thing that is manageable by Terraform, but otherwise it really isn't. And so the other part of your question was where that line is. And I think where that line is today and where it can be in the future will change a little bit. I think just as sort of even Terraform from early on, I think what we thought infrastructure as code would be when it was very, first release and where it is today is very, very different. People are doing things at massive scale that I don't even think was on the radar when we started this tool. And so the line can and will move. And I think one thing I would love to remind our community and practitioners about is that where it is today is not permanent. It's just where it is, where we are together as a whole today.
Absolutely fantastic. And I really like that. I like the fact of knowing what to expect. When I sit down to work with Terraform, I like that it's very clear to me what it does. It's those tools that haven't really established what they do or what to expect from them that I feel create that frustration. And so knowing, kind of where the edges are, I feel like is really helpful in being able to set the direction, set the expectation of what I'm going to do. And then I can make other decisions too. Might I want to use Flux or this thing or that, and can make informed decisions. So thank you for, it's not easy. Making that line in the sand either. Definitely can agree there. So thank you for for taking the time and care and focus on that front.
It's very much about using the right tool for the job. And I had this, in my head, and I think Joe Perez in the chat just dropped that same thought, and it deserves calling out, right? Terraform is good at a certain aspect of the infrastructure cycle, but it's not perfect for everything, and it shouldn't be. It's like having a Swiss Army knife and using that as a bread knife. Will it work? Sure. Are you going to have a good experience? Definitely not. Use the right tool for the job, and your experience will be better. And yeah, just that.
It's a fun one too, because even figuring out what to combine, like even, like you'd said earlier, Kareem, in terms of using console to reference things, using a tool like env console, ENV console, to create templates or to put things onto machines and having those look up how to register and work with things within your console clusters is quite fascinating. Awesome. One more slight grilling question, more just kind of a general question, then I promise I'll move back into some of the fun things. What does it, I was looking through the changelog, and configuration aliases was something that stood out. Can you talk more on what that is and kind of what its goal is to do?
Yes, and you will get some more of my patented too honest response, which I will ask Petros to sparkle up after this. So configuration aliases are a construct we added to make it very explicit if you've written a Terraform module and you expect the users to pass provider configurations into that module. And the reason we added these is because, and I'm making this number up, but 999% of the time, if someone was passing a provider into a module and it worked, it was by accident and not by design. And so we would get an awful lot of bug reports, and they were valid reports because it was really confusing, saying, I can't run Terraform Validate on my module because it doesn't have the full provider config, but it's not supposed to because I'm passing it in. I'm passing a provider in, but Terraform is weirdly using the wrong configuration and I don't understand why. Or, like it's just flat out breaking and I have no idea what's going on, what provider it's using, if I'm even terraforming things, right? So it was one of those, really uncomfortable spaces where, we had a design and it worked the way we designed it. It was just super confusing and it seemed like no amount of documentation was making it make sense. So this was both, not a great behavior. And when you reach the point that you can't possibly document it in a way that makes sense, you gotta fix the code, right? Like that is no longer a documentation issue. It's just too confusing. So we've added the configuration aliases construct so that the module developer can say, I expect provider configuration. I expect it, maybe just the base provider, maybe for multiple configurations, so that we could get rid of that confusing provider proxy config block that maybe worked one way, except it didn't, if it was a Tuesday and the moon was full kind of thing, right? So it's, I am sure for some people, it's kind of annoying, like, great, one more thing I have to go and write into my modules, an upgrade step, but it now makes the behavior a lot more explicit. I hope that makes it easier for, both people using and writing Terraform modules. And that nice little side benefit that I kind of hinted at was that Terraform Validate will now happily validate a module, even if that module itself has incomplete provider configuration, because it is now explicit that that module itself does not configure the provider. It's expecting a provider passed in. Petros, do you want to sparkle that up a little bit?
No, that was so well said. I like the only thing that I would re-emphasize that I heard from that, and I fully agree, was we want Terraform to be clear. And this was an area where it was not. And all of this work is about fixing that.
It's again, just really appreciate that moment of clarity and kind of getting to define that. I think that was it over the holiday season, there was a similar issue that was kind of fun that a coworker and I worked on, where I think that we were working with some of the providers, and I think it was AWS or Kubernetes or something like that, and ended up copying and pasting and then putting the wrong name in for one of them. And we're like, this downloads, this should work, it doesn't. And so kind of totally understand being in that space and being frustrated where it's like, oh yeah, I can't believe we did this, but hypothetically, of course, right? Hypothetically. Yeah, interesting problems to run into, and glad that this can make things like that just a little bit easier. Awesome. All right. I've got two more questions. They're kind of similar, but really would like to round it out in a fun way today. And the first question I have for you is, are there any fun Terraform Easter eggs or secrets or fun comments or anything like that that you know of? And if not, should we open a pull request and add some?
All right, I got one for you. We don't really have any Terraform Easter eggs because that's just one of those can of worms that it's hard to do right and you don't want to do wrong. However, we have developed a running joke in the Terraform core team after a day when I was doing a meeting and just was failing to say words correctly, like 3 times in a row when I was trying to talk about a feature request we had for bulk import, I kept spitting out Bork impult. And so as far as I'm concerned, that is the next feature I will be working on, is Terraform Bork impult. And I would love somewhere to put that like officially documented somehow, because that's basically the only way I'm capable of thinking of it anymore.
So good.
Petros, weren't you there that day? I was just like chewing on my own tongue. I could not talk.
It still is my favorite one of all our pretend commands.
I can't wait for Bork impult. See, I can't even say that right. Yeah, you've infected me. I don't know what's going on. Awesome. Any other fun Easter eggs or secrets that you know of, Petros?
I really don't. I was going to say something along similar lines, really just like, how you go to type Terraform and you end up typing Terra from? Yeah, we all do that all the time. Just saying.
No.
Yeah, almost.
Never.
Yeah, I need to add the "did you mean" to my shell scripts and things like that. Yeah,
A little
I'll
clippy.
type in Terraform, Tetraform. Yeah, some permutation of that I would probably lose with playing Scrabble at or something like that. Always fun. Always fun. Humbling moment. And if any of you in the audience have any questions, if you're watching along with us today, and there's any burning questions that you might have about Terraform or anyone here today, please feel free to ask. My final question for y'all today is, definitely want to include you in the screen. What's your favorite part of Terraform Core that most people don't know about? Something that you feel more people would benefit from using, or just like, hey, there's this thing and you can use it.
Functions are generally like a huge thing when you discover them. There is amazing stuff. We had HashiTalks Australia today, the first edition, and one of the first speakers kicked off with some massive CSV magic. But it was magic. It was just properly written code, and it worked. And when you think about that, you're pulling in data from CSVs, which is super compatible with everything. If you're in an enterprise, you can probably generate CSVs. And he was able to plug Terraform on the other side. That's, to me, is beautiful. Personally, for me, the template file function works in Packer, works in Terraform. It's a nice way of getting stuff that you have in Terraform into a file that some other tool might be able to use. Maybe it's a README you're generating, maybe it's something else. There is a lot of opportunity to do cool stuff with that. To a point that Chris was making, you could generate the configuration file for your configuration management tool, the inputs, by pulling them from Terraform, so you don't have to do lookups if you prefer for it to be an actual file, or if you have a reason for it to be a file and don't need dynamic lookups. I think that's definitely my personal favorite. I'm curious, Kristen, how about you?
Actually, I would build on what you said earlier, the Terraform console command. As a developer, when I am debugging or when I'm looking at issues people have opened or answering questions, I'll dump their code they've shared and just start inspecting it with Terraform console. So being able to use that, it's not something I knew existed before I actually came to work here. I was like, oh, look at this command I have never heard before in my life. And I use it frequently. It's how it makes it easier for me to kind of dig into the data structures and an output, play along with what I'm getting from a module. I've got this little feature branch where I keep trying to make this console only function that will actually print out the HCL type of, or not type, but the type of whatever kind of data structure you have. So, if you're trying to write a definition, it's like, oh, well, it's an object with a string and a list and a tuple, right? Having something that would go, oh, here is the data structure you gave me, and here is the type as I understand it. I've just not yet figured out how to make that a command that is only available in console and not in the core language. But having that has been super helpful. So you've now reminded me that I need to go and finish work on that, because I know other core developers who are like, we have a branch over here and I build it and use that function too. But yeah, the Terraform console itself is just a great little feature that I wish I had known about when I was a practitioner, and I use a lot.
I found that really helpful when working with state or imports and just kind of, I think there was a fun project that Kareem and I started on close to the time in which I started here at HashiCorp. And we decided on a name and a workspace, and we're using Terraform Cloud. And then we had a name change because it was like, no, this isn't the best name. Let's actually go with this one. And then we had to redo a lot of our Terraform state on that front. So I've gotten very well acclimated with Terraform console and Terraform state on that front. But really helpful to have. If it wasn't there, doing Terraform state surgery is not the most fun thing in the world to do. And I didn't go to school for that. I hear it's like 8 years of practice and things like that. But yeah, who knows?
It's all about statesmanship.
So you got to get a residency. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. What are your thoughts, Petros? That you got to try it, and when it comes to Terraform.
Actually, I'm gonna wax poetic about something different. So what's my favorite part of Terraform Core that most people don't know about is just try to hold it in here, just how wonderful the engineers who work on it are. They are some of the most product-minded, defense of the user engineers, just wonderful people through and through. I have been honored and just blessed to work with them and to learn from them. I think it's really hard to build a tool like Terraform, a tool that's as popular as it is, that is used in mission critical ways at organizations of all sizes all over the world. And the core engineers are really conscious of that. And it comes with a big burden, an interaction burden, an emotional burden to interact with the community in a caring and calm fashion day in, day out. And to keep that desire to solve their problems and work hard at it. And it's a pretty special group of people. And I am glad that this product and this company continues to support them. And through, I am just exceptionally grateful to have been part of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Petros. It truly means a lot to hear that from you, and I feel no differently in every interaction that I have with the team. It's just the level of care and empathy, and just that willingness and that excitedness to hear about what's going on, and really thinking things through, and not just saying yes for the sake of it. It's something that is just heavily weighed, and I can't agree more with just the amount of talent that all of these people have, and like you said, just the fact that they care so much more. It's just been such a fun group to work with, and to get to see my dog can't even contain herself.
I'm not crying. It's just very dusty in here. To be clear, this is dust. We love you too, Petros, very much. You were delightful to work with.
It has been one of the biggest pleasures to work with this community over the past years, and just get to know people and have a chance, there's like always this like fanboy aspect when you meet one of the developers and it's like, wait, you're the one that built that feature that I'm using. And it's meaningful because it's real people that answer your ticket. It's not a nameless, faceless corporation that doesn't care and that just does it for a paycheck. It's if you look at Terraform itself, 1,500 people have contributed code or documentation or something, and that's just for the Terraform binary. That's not talking about any of the providers. And it takes, it's not even a village. It takes like a city for all of this, and it's been so amazing. And our community is a huge part of that on all sides. The community of developers, the community of people who provide feedback and tell us, hey, you know what, you took away this feature, but we really need it. And it prompts us to build a better version of it. That interaction is almost magical.
Well, thank you so much for joining, and I agreed so much, Kareem. It's just it really does take a city, and it takes that level of focus, and I feel like that's the biggest thing to get right, is that what is important, and this team has continued to show that they they have that focus and know where it's at, and really just make infrastructure much easier when it comes to tools like Terraform and infrastructure as code. It looks like we have one question, and then we'll sign off for today because we are at time. Today's question from the audience is, will there be a way to add debug logging only into a single resource data source module so that can do localized debugging? Recently, I felt the need for that.
I don't think we're going to have that level of granularity to say I only want logs for a specific resource. However, what we're doing with the structured logging, and specifically we're working on a JSON log output or finished it. I don't actually know. Petros, you can correct me there. But that'll give you the ability to kind of output all of your logs and then use other tools to get exactly what you're interested in. So having JSON log output may make it easier to use something like even just JQ to go through the logs and say, okay, show me every log that's related to this module or this resource. So I'm not exactly sure where we are with that format and how stable it is, but you should be able to dig into the logs and get the specific, like I said, modular resource or whatever it is you're looking for, if not now, in the near future. Although again, that'll pair up with when the actual providers are released to support it as well. But it is definitely in work to make that easier for you to do.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, with that, would like to sign off for this community office hours. Thank you so much, Petros and Kristen and Kareem, for joining me today. Thank you all for tuning in and for listening. This will be available on YouTube, or you just watched it at some point in time in the future. Thank you for checking it out. Today was wonderful. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And with that, we will sign off. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye.